footed for Ennis. He got it! He got it! Perfection in Pittsburgh!
You believe in miracles? Yes!
The Bills make me wanna shout.
Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills.
This is the Jube Alert on WNIA Radio. Here are your hosts, Jubert and Kyle Barker.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Monday, November 2nd, 2015, and this is the Jube Alert here on WNIA, Niagara University's Mix and More Radio. Alongside Kyle Barker, I am Greg Jubert. Lots that happened over the course of this past weekend, so we're going to jump off to the big story that broke with last night, the 2015 World Series between the Kansas City Royals and the New York Mets. The series ended actually just like I predicted when we were talking about this back on Friday night. I said the Mets would be behind Noah Syndergaard and win Game 3, but would end up falling in 5. And that's just exactly what happened yesterday. Matt Harvey may have stuck out there a little too long trying to go into the 9th inning, let Terry Collins help persuade him to stay in, and eventually choked with a leadoff double, and then it ended up in shambles. Game went into extras. Addison Reed and Bartolo Colon gave up big runs, ending with a final score of 7-2. So the Royals, congratulations to them, winning their first World Series since 1985. Obviously, the Royals last season was a big deal, losing in Game 7, leaving the tying run on third base with Alex Gordon. This year they made sure to be all in, all chips in the middle of the table for this year, because they knew, like with any team, the window of opportunity always closes. And I think looking at the Royals going through and weaving their way throughout the playoffs, and you saw they were the best team in the American League all year. I mean, you saw Toronto got hot there at the very end of the season. You saw Texas came out of nowhere. The Astros did pretty well too. But the Royals were far and away the best team. And the All-Star voting was another sign of that, looking at how Salvador Perez, Alex Gordon, among others, were respected in that. And you look at what the Royals compare to the Mets in terms of their windows of opportunity. The Royals really don't have too many legitimate power threats on their level, I think. And you look at last year, after the Royals lost the World Series, they didn't lose a lot of pieces. They lost Billy Butler to Oakland. They didn't want him in free agency. He's off with the A's. And he turned out not to be too significant of a player lost in that deal. And then you look at James Shields, who struggled mightily for big game James, struggled mightily in the World Series, ended up in San Diego, which is all of a sudden turned into a hitter-friendly ballpark thanks to the winds and everything out there in San Diego. So they had pretty much the same team, same core together. And even looking at next year, a lot of these pieces are going to be right there with them still. I mean, when you look at the contributors that will be gone, Alex Rios, chances are, he's 34. He'll probably walk. Johnny Cueto was really going to be, chances are, a 2-month rental. So I wouldn't expect Cueto to be back. He'll probably get a big deal somewhere, whether it's with the Dodgers or another team in need of pitching. That's to be determined. Ben Zobrist came in the trade deadline as a really big player. They thought maybe he missed time in the World Series on paternity leave. That was not the case. And Chris Young, who pitched a lot in the World Series actually this year, he's 36. He might come back on a smaller deal. And one of the guys not on the World Series roster that was with the Royals near the end of this year, of course, was Johnny Gomes. He also can walk as a free agent. So you look at the Royals' big pieces between Hosmer, Moustakas, Escobar, Gordon, Kane, Dyson, Perez. They're all there, and that's just positional players. You look at the Mets, on the other hand. Mets might need a little more. Bartolo Colon is 42. He might end up retiring. Daniel Murphy's going to be the big guy to look at with the way he played up to through the NLCS. Bobby Parnell, Tyler Clippard, Juan Uribe, who turned out to be a big acquisition and a big loss at one point. Yoenis Cespedes, which was just reported today that the Mets would, chances are, not re-sign Cespedes. So he may very well end up with yet another team. According to ESPN, the Mets are, quote, highly unlikely to re-sign Cespedes. They are expected to, quote, modestly pursue him. So we'll see how much they're willing to invest in, a guy with a cannon of an arm and, a flashy bat, too. A guy who's proven that he can hit 20 home runs in this league year in and year out. So your first thoughts about, anything that's happened between the Royals or the Mets or the series as a whole?
Well, last night was an interesting game. I'm sure Terry Collins would like to redo the entire ninth inning. If this is a regular season game, you're giving Matt Harvey the ball, going out there, giving him a complete game, an opportunity for a complete game shutout. But in the World Series, if you're thinking about what's ahead, you got to save the arm. Familia hasn't blown very many saves, if at all, this season. Has a couple of slip-ups in the postseason, but you have to save Harvey's arm in case you do, in fact, make it to Game 7. Maybe pitch him on very short rest, have your best pitcher available. You got to save the arm. And it was also interesting last night how Daniel Murphy went from hero to zero in a matter of 5 games. He was the sole reason that team pretty much got to the World Series, and he had a bunch of costly errors in different games that allowed the Royals to really jump ahead of the Mets in this series. Interesting statistic, though, from the World Series here. The amount of innings played in the World Series, the Mets led 20 at one point. They had the lead in 24 innings compared to Kansas City's 13 innings. The Mets were dominating for most of these games and kind of fell apart. It was not a 5-game series at all. It was very competitive, very entertaining baseball. And congrats to the Kansas City Royals, the 2015 World Series champions. A very, very well built-up team from top to bottom, from the hitting rotation, from relief pitching to starting pitching. They had all the pieces that they needed to go out and get this title this year. They were no fluke being in the World Series last year. They just kind of ran into some history of Madison Bumgarner. Credit to George Brett and the staff there in Kansas City. Wonderful job this season by the Kansas City Royals.
Here's the thing with the Harvey deal, and I remember watching this when they were talking about it after the 8th inning about a decision that would have to be made. In the 2 innings prior, in the 7th and 8th inning, it only took Harvey 9 pitches to get out of those situations. Well and away over 100 pitches at that point. And you're talking about a guy who has had Tommy John surgery before. I don't know what you do in that situation. If you let him go, or you have the confidence to fully invest in Familia for the 9th inning, and you looked and you could see on the Fox telecast when they were in the dugout, Harvey with the pitching coach talking about, that chances are Harvey was going to be pulled for the 9th, and you could hear Harvey mouth, "Oh, no, I'm not," or "Oh, no, you won't," in regards to taking him out. And then he went from the pitching coach straight to Terry Collins to talk about it. So I don't know what you can do in that situation, though. That's really tough. And that might be something that comes back to haunt the Mets for a long time, is that situation. I mean, can you blame Terry Collins? No, because, again, it took him 18 pitches to get through 2 innings. He averaged 3 pitches a batter. And he has been an incredible pitcher all year long. And there should be no pitch count because it's the last game of the year. Now, maybe there should be a pitch count because, he has had Tommy John surgery. But, I mean, it was a big deal in the game yesterday. It ended up changing all the momentum in that game. That plus, I want to talk about that throw from first to home a little bit. When Salvador Perez, with a runner on third, hit a ground ball with Familia pitching, hit a ground ball up to Alcides Escobar at short, throws it over to first, they get the out, Hosmer sprints home, and Lucas Duda throws a ball that I'm sure he has thrown hundreds of times by now, is that throw to the home plate. And he sailed it wide left across his body. And it's, I played first base for a long time, and it's the same thing. When you go and you rush that throw, you're not going to get it right on the money, right in the where you want it, right where the glove is. And that was another perfect example yesterday. And the Mets just got a little too quick. They waited. They did the right thing. Waiting, holding. Or I'm sorry, they didn't throw to Escobar at short. My bad, because that's Kansas City's guy, of course. Yep. Ground ball short to first. And they did the right thing. They went and they looked at him. They looked and checked the runner back at third. They got that throw quickly to first. They got the out. And then the play at the plate. It's just a play you have to make. If you're a first baseman in this league and you've played that position and you've played it so many times, that same throw, it's something you work on in spring training in February. It's something you do all season, plays like that. it's just a mistake that you can't afford to make, let alone on the biggest stage.
He would have been out by a mile, too. And as remarkably bad of a throw that was by Lucas Duda, Travis Darno almost caught that ball. And if he caught the ball, I think 100% that he would have been able to turn around and tag the runner out. It was a really gutsy run on that situation. David Wright checked off the runner, got the out at first, and then to go home in that situation, that's a really, really gutsy play. But it's the type of play that you have to make sometimes in order to win the World Series. And then it ties the game, and then they explode for 5 in the 12th inning. You just kind of had that sense it was coming. The Mets were just desperately clinging to whatever life they had, and it drastically fell apart in the 12th inning. Gutsy. That's all I can say is gutsy right there.
And you look at, like we talked about, the Royals not really having a big threat in this American League. And the Mets' window of opportunity, even with all that great pitching, between a front four of Harvey, DeGrom, Syndergaard, Matz, and Zach Wheeler coming back next year, you're still talking about a National League that will include the Cardinals, who will continue to be resilient, and 2 other teams in the National League Central, and the Pirates and the Cubs, who will be right back in the thick of things too. You look at the Dodgers will be there, I'm sure, and you have the Giants. They always play the year-on, year-off deal. Well, next year, if history shows, will be their year to jump back on. So you're talking about the Mets. They did a lot better than I think a lot of people will give them credit for, because you look at, that was a division, everybody from Sports Illustrated and ESPN down, they picked the National League East to go straight to the Nationals. With Scherzer, it was a no-brainer. Washington never got it together all year. The Mets took advantage of that, and by the time the All-Star break came, the Mets were already starting to pull away more and more. So you look at, is the division, again, a very good possibility for next year? Absolutely. Absolutely. The Mets can go back and win that National League East, even with the pitching Washington has, because they proved it. But to go back to the World Series, they're going to have to be running on all cylinders, and they're going to need a hero like Daniel Murphy was for a while. So that'll be interesting to tell. Once again, congratulations to the Kansas City Royals. They win Game 5 yesterday, 7-2, and take the World Series in 5 games. So, no baseball until spring training now. Wow. Okay, well, we're going to shift our gears now from one big game that happened yesterday to the other big game in primetime last night on NBC. Sunday Night Football between 2 undefeated teams, both 6-0, in the Broncos and Packers. And wow, did this game not go the way I thought it was going to. This was the first time, the NBC telecast also mentioned, the first time that 2 undefeated teams have played each other this late in a season, since the Pats and the Colts did it when the Patriots were on their undefeated 16-0 season back in 2007. You're talking about Green Bay, high-flying, always top of the league offense. Even without Jordy Nelson, you look at James Jones' comeback, and Green Bay's offense has just been doing everything and taking advantage of teams left and right. You look at Denver this season, has come away with some squeaky wins this year. You're talking about in Oakland, only won because of a pick 6 by Chris Harris Jr. Cleveland was just a crapshoot in Cleveland against Josh McCown and the Browns in a game that went to overtime. You're looking at left and right games. Every single game has come down to 12 points or less until last night. Every game came down to a single score, with the exception of one in their other Sunday night appearance at Detroit. But boy, did Peyton Manning look great yesterday. And it's something we haven't seen a lot of this year. He's really been struggling between the older age, the neck rotation, the arm might not be what it used to be. But he, yesterday, despite not throwing a touchdown, was phenomenal. And Denver's offense really showed up yesterday for the first time all year as they beat Green Bay 29-10. And people were left and right calling Denver a fluke, as they should. They should have been calling them a fluke, because they had gotten away with a lot of wins thanks to their defense. But Peyton Manning yesterday looked like the Peyton Manning of old. 21 for 29 for 340 and a pick. No scores, but he still got the ball in. You look at C.J. Anderson had 101 yards and a score on the ground. And you look at Demaryius Thomas, ended up with 8 catches for 168 yards. And on top of that, Green Bay, that offense, which again has been flourishing all year, got shut down by a very, very legitimate Super Bowl contending Denver defense, led by Von Miller, and DeMarcus Ware's hurt now, but Aqib Talib and Chris Harris and a bunch of other big guys, a bunch of other big names that have been out there this year. Aaron Rodgers yesterday only threw for 77 yards. That's the worst he's ever done in a game that he's both finished and started. I mean, it was a total shock when I thought for sure like Denver's defense would win this game if anything. But I thought Green Bay's offense is just doing so well right now. And Eddie Lacy's getting back. He's been nursing some injuries for a bit. But man, Denver came to play yesterday. And I'm not saying that they're going to make it and be as good as New England or Cincinnati. When you look at the AFC, those three teams right now are the cream of the crop. And I'm not going to say that between New England's high-flying offense and Cincinnati's overall team play, Denver is on that same level necessarily. But boy, does Denver's D give them a good run for their money. I mean, they've just been so much fun to watch all year. They've just done good things left and right. Any thoughts on Denver?
Well, here's an interesting stat that I've been looking at for the past couple of days. Man, I think the phrase defense wins games or defense wins championships is very true at this moment. Denver is obviously the number one defense in the league. They're only giving up 261 yards a game. Only 170 of those are passing yards. But here on the flip end of this, the San Diego Chargers have the best offense in the league with 423 yards a game. They're one of the best offenses in the league, and they're 2-6.
Yes, but look at San Diego's games. Look at all of them. Look at all of them, though. Look how many of these games could have gone the other way. They lost to Cincinnati by 5. Minnesota, they lost by 17. But Steelers by 4. Packers by 7. Raiders by 8. Ravens by 3. I mean, you're looking at a team there, with the exception of that Vikings game, could legitimately be right now 7-1. Honestly, if you flip around everything.
Right. Well, and the crux of the disconnect here, the defense for the Chargers is not that good. So here's the point I'm trying to make. You can have a number one offense, and your defense can be subpar, and that does not really going to guarantee you games. If your defense, like Denver's defense can hold you in games for as long as they can and allow you 8 weeks for your offense to try to find something to spark it, you're a dangerous team. And that's a team that is destined to make a nice run in the playoffs here. The Denver offense at one point in the season was last in the league. Now, over the past 3 weeks, they've climbed their way back up to the 17th highest offense in the National Football League. But it just goes to show you that if you have a good defense, things can go right for you. And that Denver defense held a great Green Bay offense to 10 points yesterday. That is, I mean, I don't think any other team in the league, any defense in the league, can hold Green Bay to 10 points. Any team.
Though Buffalo did give them a good run for their money last year. They were right in the thick of things in that game, too.
Yep.
And you would think that Green Bay would still be able to do well on the home. I mean, obviously, you don't have the Lambeau advantage. But, wow, Denver, like you talked about, number one defense in the league, number one passing defense in the league, and 4th running D in the league. I mean, that's a Super Bowl contender defense. Legitimately. I know we're only halfway through the season, but you look at now, they're 7-0. They have a 3-game lead over anybody in the division. Second is Oakland, which we'll get to if we have time.
Barely any injuries, too.
Do you consider that's very true with the exception of DeMarcus Ware?
Whose injury is not very significant at all. He's kind of like on a day-to-day status. Week to week, we'll put it as that.
Do you think Denver's a Super Bowl contender?
I think Denver,
as of right now,
I think Denver is a very legitimate Super Bowl contender. Absolutely.
It depends. If Payton shows more of what he did yesterday, and that yesterday wasn't a flash in the bucket of last season, or his whole career for that matter, because if it goes back to the same old Payton, who's been struggling all year, only has thrown 7 TDs, not the Peyton Manning that we've been accustomed to for the last 15 years. It's going to depend on him. Denver's defense will take them as far as they can, but when it comes to Peyton Manning, that's going to be the next step going forward. And he has the weapons. You saw Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, the tight end game with Jacob Tamme. I mean, they have the weapons. It's just about if Peyton Manning can hit him, use him in stride, make adjustments based on maybe his age and his body status. So that's go ahead.
Well, here's the thing. If the Denver offense has been improving every week, man, I can't wait to see the Denver offense next week. Because like you said, Peyton Manning looked best game of the season by far for Peyton Manning. And when you have a defense, like I said, that's given you 8 weeks to try to allow your offense to figure it out, and what's wrong with that offense? Dangerous team in the Denver Broncos right now.
Now, both of these teams play really, really big games next week, but neither one is slated for prime time, believe it or not. Denver will be going to Indianapolis to battle the Colts, so Peyton Manning will once again return to Indy. So that will be a big game to watch, and I think with the way Andrew Luck's been playing through fractured ribs all year, since week 3, I think Denver's defense could give him a very bad day. And then you look at Green Bay, goes to Carolina next Sunday at 1. And Carolina, who plays tonight on Monday night, is going to, I'm sure, come out with all their weapons. They've now gone over the hump in beating Seattle. Now they want to prove like that wasn't a fluke. And we're going to be legitimate Super Bowl contenders too. So that's something to watch. So once again, Denver at Indianapolis next week. Green Bay at Carolina next week. And before we go to break, I want to talk about one team that really drew my eyes in particular yesterday. It was the only other late o'clock game with the exception of the Seahawks and Cowboys. And that's the Oakland Raiders. And we've talked about, and everybody knows that since their Super Bowl in 2002, Oakland has struggled for answers left and right. Quarterback play, players with poor off-the-field records, the list goes on. Oakland has really struggled and have not been able to make a run to the playoffs since that 2002 season led by Rich Gannon. Now in Derek Carr, which looks like a fantastic move, you're talking about a team that in a very weak AFC, with the exception of those 3 teams, New England, Cincinnati, Denver, has a legitimate shot, I think, at being a playoff team. You look at, since they were 11-5 and went to the Super Bowl that year, they've had 2 years, 2010 and 11, where they were led by Jason Campbell, among other quarterbacks, in which they went 8-8. And every other season since then, you're looking at, they've been somewhere between 2 and 5 wins each year. And you look at the fact that in building a rookie quarterback last year with Derek Carr, the number one thing that they could have done to help him, they did, and that was to get a solid offensive line, which was top of the league last year. And this season, only 3 other teams in the NFL have given up fewer sacks than the Raiders' O-line. The Jets, Redskins, Bengals. 10 sacks this year through 8 games. Pretty good. Pretty good. And then you look at, now you have drafted Amari Cooper as a solid weapon. You got Michael Crabtree, who's been to the highest level this game has to offer in a Super Bowl and multiple NFC championship games. You look at all these other pieces. You have the defensive leadership of Charles Woodson, which has been huge. He got a 65th pick, in fact, yesterday, tying him for 5th on the all-time list. I mean, you're talking about that was a Jets team yesterday that came in flying high. Yes, Ryan Fitzpatrick got hurt with a non-throwing thumb. And Geno Smith got a little nicked up too. But the Raiders had their way yesterday. Early, and they were able to hold that lead. Just like with San Diego the week before. A San Diego's team that, once again, their record is not indicative of how they play.
Well, Oakland has a very young, youthful team with an ageless wonder at safety. And he's leading the league in interceptions. They're a team to not push aside here. If you had to pick Oakland and the Jets, and you had to ask which team has a better shot at making the playoffs, I'm picking Oakland.
Over the Jets in the playoffs.
Yep. Well, to make the playoffs.
Right.
And I think it's because Oakland is just a team in that AFC on that side of the nation there, and they're just so youthful. And when they make mistakes, they put their heads back up, try to run the same stuff again, and they try to play as hard as they can. And the Jets are a little bit more experienced. but they're in a much tougher division with the Patriots in there. I mean, you got the big bad bear, just the Patriots just looming over those teams in the AFC East. I mean, we'll see what happens here, but I would pick the Raiders over the Jets at this point in time to make the playoffs.
It would be tough for me to pull away from that, but you look at also Revis and Sheldon Richardson. Jets' defense is right there too, but man, Charles.
Here's the thing: the Bills could come alive at any moment now too. The Bills
there's a lot of teams
struggling.
There's a lot of teams in the AFC that are right on the cusp of hitting gold. You have a lot of teams left and right with 3 or 4 wins.
Mm-hmm. I think the Bills could potentially be a team that catches up to the Jets. I don't see the Chargers and the Kansas City Chiefs catching up to the Oakland Raiders in that division there. So that's where I see how Oakland could make the playoffs here as a wild card and the Jets not, because I could see the Jets possibly losing games down the stretch to the Dolphins and the Bills, and I mean that's just how I see it.
Man, is Charles Woodson incredible though. He's been everything for this Raiders. Oldest player in the NFL at 39, 8-time Pro Bowler, 65 picks, and his second all-time in pick sixes with 11. I mean, he's, like you said, an ageless wonder, and somebody who will definitely be seen in Canton not too far from now. But the Raiders as a playoff team, boy, it's been a while since we've said anything like that. It really has. And they've put together 2 really great wins these last 2 weeks. And you look at the week before, one Derek Carr mistake made all the difference. Otherwise, they would have beaten a very good Denver team led by that defense, and they lost 16-10. So the Raiders are definitely a team we're going to keep our eye on. I think certainly looking forward. So next week, the Raiders will come to the East Coast, where they will battle Big Ben and the Steelers. When we come back, we're going to go through all of the games from this past Sunday, including, of course, speaking of the Steelers, a significant injury that could change the Steelers' entire season. What is it? That and more when we come back to the Jube Alert on WNIA, Niagara University's Mix and More Radio.
Hit on the throw. He has his man. It's Hogan into the end zone for the Buffalo touchdown. Taylor's going to take a shot. He's got his man Harvin caught in the end zone for the Buffalo touchdown.
Buffalo Bills football on Fox and CBS all season long.